Assalamu Alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today I have on the show, you're going to hear from in the next few moments, the first American Muslim activist. In 1986, he was the first full-time Muslim activist. And you're going to hear his story. For over 40 years, he's been working on helping make all of us here having a safer place in the United States. But that's not all. The key thing is he provides a recipe for how do you keep to the values of Islam while you're trying to make the world a better place in a very challenging world. That is, we all know. So folks, my guest today, Salam Al-Marayati, co-founder of MPAC, the Muslim Public Affairs Council.
Assalamu Alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My dear brother Salam Al-Marayati, a mentor, teacher, also someone who I've been in a weekly Qur'an Halaqa. More on that later. Thank you for being on the show today.
Wa Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's great to be with you, Tayyab. Always good to be with you.
Always good to see you. I wanted to, first kind of, I met Dr. Jihad Turk earlier, and I remember, one time I had mentioned to you I was hanging out with him, and you showed me a picture of you and him hanging out in Arizona. How did you go from Arizona to California? And then tell me about, what inspired you to start MPAC in 1988. Like, what was going on? What happened?
Oh, there's a lot going on. Well, first of all, it was God's plan. I don't think I can take credit for much of it, other than I saw the signs and the cues from God. And like we read the ayahs of the Qur'an, we also need to read the ayahs of life. And so my dad is really the one who decided to move to Los Angeles from Phoenix, Arizona. And I wanted to stay in Arizona. I tried to remain there and go to college, but they were going to make me pay out-of-state tuition because my parents had left and I was a minor, and so my residency resided with my parents. So I went to UCLA at the end, and ironically, and again, part of God's plan, I went to a mosque that really changed my life. Because before that, I wasn't even praying. We fast Ramadan. We did some activities in Phoenix where every Sunday we'd go and have one of our parents give us a lecture about either Arabic or Islamic studies. We'd have to find a basement of a bank to go. We didn't even have a mosque back in the 70s, 60s and 70s, and so which is weird because that's another way of looking at a Muslim underground in the basement of a bank. and so going to Los Angeles, it was such a big change because there was a big mosque. There was a mosque in Orange County by Dr. Muzammil Siddiqui. I think there was a mosque in Inglewood. There was a mosque somewhere in the Valley, and there was a mosque in downtown Los Angeles, and that was it. And so I went to the mosque in downtown Los Angeles, met this incredible man named Dr. Mar Hathout, who became the advisor for the youth group, and I became president. I got to know him, and then we just started doing conferences and events and campaigns, and actually started giving lectures at the mosque about what we as youth were thinking. And so it gave us that opportunity, and I think that was the biggest difference being in the Islamic Center of Southern California compared to other places. Not that other places didn't support the youth, but the Islamic Center made the youth part of the leadership. And that's when I started thinking, hey, this is something special. And even though I was studying biochemistry at UCLA and I got my degree and I went to engineering, I worked as an engineer for 2 years, it never satisfied me. It was a job, 9 to 5, go there, do your work, write your report, go home. And I was actually depressed. And my wife said, you were very depressed at that time.
Wow.
And I said, well, I got to make a change. And so I went to Dr. Hatut and I said, why don't I do this work full time instead of trying to be an engineer and then doing work for the Islamic Center volunteer, even though I was actually doing more volunteer work for the Islamic Center than I was actually doing my real work that I was getting paid for. And so I told Dr. Hatut, I said, if we're all about justice, shouldn't I be working for the Islamic Center and not, get money from a place where I'm not really working? I'm not doing anything that is satisfying, and I'm spending more time at the center. Anyway, he was reserved at first, but he agreed. And so in 1986, I was the first full-time Muslim activist for the American Muslim community. And I don't know anyone else that was doing it at that time.
For sure, nobody was. Tell them.
And so immediately we started meeting with the Los Angeles Times, and we did events with the mayor and the members of Congress. They all came to the mosque, and people said, well, this is something special. Let's build something out of it. So in 1988, we formed the Muslim Public Affairs Council. In 86, it was actually called the Public Relations Committee of the Islamic Center of Southern California. And then it morphed into MPAC in 1988. And in 1988, we sent Muslims as delegates to both the Republican and Democratic National Committees. And we had Reverend Jesse Jackson, who was a presidential candidate, make a campaign stop at the Islamic Center in Southern California.
First time, wow.
And it was on national TV, and officials came, the media came, and it was when we made the Islamic Center of Southern California a landmark. We put the center on the map. Yeah. At that time. And the Wall Street Journal came and they said, what is going on in the center? And they said, walking into the center is like walking into the United Nations. You see people from all walks of life. So things just happened then, and I've been with MPAC since then. So really, this is my 40th year.
Wow.
As a Muslim activist. And each day, it's like they say about the ideal job is when you look forward to going to work every day and there's something new, and I'm here in the office all by myself, but I'm happy.
Yeah.
Other people are going to walk in a few minutes.
No, I love that. I mean, it's the first thing I noticed that, mashallah, I was thinking in my head that in this post-COVID world where, people are working from anywhere and everywhere, especially their bed or dining table, you're going into the office even after 40 years. At the start of your opening, I didn't want to cut you off, but I want to go back to it because I felt like it's something often overlooked, and it was so powerful. You said, Tayyab, we read the ayat of the Qur'an, but there's also the ayat in life, the signs in life that we have to pay attention to. And as you take me back to 1986, I was only 6 years old. When you take me back to 1986, but I do remember 1988, I think it was the 88 election. I was 8 years old, and my dad was watching Reverend Jesse Jackson. And I remember my dad saying, this is the first time, and I was just a kid. I was 8 years old. My dad was just saying, this is the first time a presidential candidate is visiting a masjid in America. And he was just so proud. And so,
right.
First of all, thank you for doing that, because I can't imagine how many dads and moms across not only America, but the world were feeling proud in that moment. Just like maybe, Black moms and dads were proud when they saw Obama in the White House,
That's right.
Just like Catholic moms and dads might have been happy when JFK was in the White House, for example, right? You always have this moment where you feel proud. But you said ayat of life. And how important is that for a founder or for a youth or for a rising star today? And how do they see that? What do they do when they see an ayat in life, a sign in life?
I always go back to the prophetic mission. and try to learn from that. And when you think about all the prophets and what they did, Noah, his job was to take his people from drowning in madness to a safe harbor. And that was his mission. Mission accomplished for Noah. Abraham built the Kaaba with his son and made it and prayed for prosperity and security for his future generation. Mission accomplished. Moses took his people from oppression to freedom, even though God said, wait in the desert after he left, and that was the end of his mission. Isa alayhi salam, Jesus and Moses alayhi salam as well, all of these prophets, peace be upon them. Isa simply gave the gospel to people and formed his disciples, and they spread the word. That was his mission. And so sometimes we think that we're supposed to conquer and liberate and go and be powerful, and you want that. You want more power at the beginning, and you think that that's what you're supposed to do. But at the end, sometimes I think you have to press pause and say, are we ready for power? So when we look at Muslim majority countries where certain Islamic groups did attain power but failed, they were not ready. Whether in Algeria or in Egypt or in Iran or wherever, Afghanistan, did they really serve the people? And were the people ready to have them in power? I would say no. And the same thing for American Muslims. Are we ready to be at the highest levels of power in America? Or do we still need more development? I think God is telling us you still need more time. God does not change the condition of people until they change what's in themselves. So that's the change we have to look towards. It's the internal change and creating the infrastructure so that when we do attain power, we are ready for it, and we're ready to benefit not just Muslims, but benefit all of society. Religion is meant to be a benefit for society. It's meant to be establishing justice and equity in society. And so that is the arc, if you will, and the trajectory that we need to be on. And if we're not there yet, if we're just talking about having halal stores and getting my my coffee in the evening of Ramadan with all my buddies, and we think that that's it, well, we're a lot far off from where we need to be. And so I look at the prophetic mission then and say the job of MPAC and all Muslim organizations is to prepare the future so that they can be at a better situation. And if somebody down the line becomes a president or a member of Congress or even a school board official, that person is ready and it becomes a star, not just in terms of, oh, we got a Muslim in political office, but we have a leader from the American Muslim community who's a leader for America. And that is when I believe we have made a change for the betterment of our society.
So as I hear you talk about that shift in terms of preparing ourselves, something that I am running into a lot today is I meet a lot of youth who are saying, I teach at a high school and I teach I teach at Bayan Graduate College. And, these rising stars will often say, when I say, hey, what are you passionate about? Well, I want to bring justice. I want to bring equality and service. And then when I say to them, well, what's in the way of that? What's your biggest challenge? Well, it's hard for me to fundraise for this. It's hard for me to build movement or support for this work. And then I'll say, well, why? What are you running into? And they'll say, well, it's because the donors are so focused on, food baskets and, orphan support or, urgent, relief for whatever's going on around the world. And, what advice do you give? For me, I think this is part of that arc you're talking about. When I hear you say, Tayyab, we're not ready for leading humanity, for making America, better for everybody, because we're so focused on this other thing. We're on this different arc, and we haven't made it all the way to this arc yet, including our philanthropy. But what advice would you say to, especially because you did it? I mean, in 1986 and in 1988, I mean, no one was thinking about social justice. No one was thinking about advocacy. No one was thinking about, political policy, building inclusive policy for everybody. And so, most of the founders that I met that are in this space, they largely accelerated after 9/11. But before that, you're doing this thing 12, 15 years before that. So what advice would you give, and how did you overcome those challenges to some of these people?
Well, I think for the young Muslim activist, I think the only advice I have to give them is there's no entitlement. Just because you are a Muslim activist or a Muslim leader in an organization doesn't mean that we're all supposed to come and support you. You need to deserve it. You need to show what your work is all about. And you need time. You need to get out there and really work on a shoestring budget. Start from the humble beginnings. We're not going to give you a fancy office and all this staff. And the work in activism also, it requires you to build structure. A lot of people who come from even government or media and try to work in Muslim organizations, they fail because they're so used to a bureaucratic structure, and then immediately they're put in a situation where there's practically no structure. It's usually 3 or 4 people, and you're there to say, you're there to change the world, right? And that's a completely different mindset. So you have to work at getting that support. And you can take shortcuts. Some of them, it's fine. You can go find a grant for $1 million or go find a government that will give you a lot of money. But sometimes that's not what you want. That's not what's good for you. That's not what you need. Maybe that's what you want, but that's not what you need. You need to build that community grassroots support. So you got to be out there in the community, engaging people and getting their support. In terms of donors, I think we need to educate our community about Zakat. Zakat is not just about feeding the poor. That's the minimum. Feeding the poor is the least of our Zakat contributions. There's much more to it than that. So when you read the Qur'an and it says, that Zakat contributions can be given to soften the hearts of others. What does that mean? And what are we doing to engage the broader society to get them to understand our mission, to accept and then advocate for us and be a part of our movement? That is what softening the hearts of others means, in my opinion. Yet there's very little discussion in our mosques about what that category of zakat is, and therefore most Muslims just go to the default, I'm going to send food and blankets, which is great. The oppressed people need food, need blankets, need a place to sleep, and need schools. So we should continue doing that. But our community is so wealthy, they can do so much more with their zakat contributions. Zakat is also for the liberation of people. So what does that mean, that we are doing something to liberate people? What does it mean to make Islam a message that wins the hearts and minds of people and is a force for liberation? That is the task of our organizations, in addition to the humanitarian efforts. And I believe sometimes donors, there are 2 problems with the donor class in our community. Some think that just because they have the money, they have the answers. Yeah. And, they're going to give money to here and there, and maybe they'll give 50,000 or 100,000, and God bless them. May God reward them for those donations. But that in and of itself, these days, you need, compared to other communities that have budgets of $80 and $100 million, and our organizations, if we're at $5 million, we're like, we are making bank now, right? And then we're looking at our counterparts in the nonprofit sector who are operating with $80 and $100 million budgets, and we're like, oh man, we are nothing. So our donor class needs to understand that if they want to scale, they keep saying you need to scale. Well, you need money to scale. Well, then they need to make it clear what's the criteria that we as nonprofit organizations need to meet to earn that money, that funding that will help our organizations scale. But all in all, from where we started with a budget of $30,000 in 1988. That was me. And now, alhamdulillah, MPAC is about ready to go to $4 million dollar budget, maybe $5 within a year after that. So we're making progress, but we still have a long ways to go to have that social impact in American society. Yet, when you think about American Muslims, if there are 6 million, let's say 3 million generate a per capita income of 100,000, that's $300 billion of economic power that we have. Where are we using that economic power? Where is it going to? And we can't just spend on weddings and fancy trips and huge houses and entertainment centers and fancy cars. We have to put the money, and then for religious, we can't just give it to the poor. We should give it to the poor and soften the hearts of others and work for liberation. That's where Zakat needs to go.
You mentioned many times about the foundation of the Qur'an, and I have now worked with hundreds of Muslim nonprofits, and MPAC is the only organization that has a weekly Qur'an discussion. Still to this day, I've now been intimately working with Muslim nonprofits globally since 2016, 2017, and as a volunteer since 1996. And I would say MPAC is the only organization that has a weekly Qur'an Halaqa. What I want to ask you is, I'm seeing many organizations, they are Muslim led. They have Muslim in their name. But what advice do you have that they stick to their core values? Do they have to have a weekly Halaqa, or is it something else? Like, how do you keep the organization centered? What advice do you have for them?
Well, anyone that's starting a new organization, I think they ask me, well, what advice do I have for them? And the issue of the core beliefs, what you just alluded to, what you just talked about, is my advice to them. I said, you have to understand what your core beliefs are first and have that conviction that that is what is going to make impact, social impact from those values. And if it is about the Qur'an, then you need to understand what the Qur'an is. And what is it in the Qur'an that you are using as fuel for your work, for your day-to-day, because there are going to be days where you're going to be alone. Just like Martin Luther King was in a jail in Birmingham. That's, we all have that moments where we feel we are alone and our friends have just abandoned us, and you need to be ready to continue to move on from that moment. And in general, and there's a lot to talk about we don't have time to really get into, but in general, what is your theory of change? Are you just trying to put more Muslims in positions of influence and just make more Muslims like there are more of others in the field? Or are you trying to bring Islamic values to America that will make America better from the infusion of these Islamic values? Those are two different models.
Yeah.
And I would say that what is more effective is the latter, is to make the Islamic values, which are also American values, work in concert to build a movement for social, political, and religious change in America, because it is much needed. When you hear about the largest Christian organizations as fundamentalist Christians who want to go and they want to see Armageddon take place so that all the Muslims will be killed and the Jews will convert or will be killed. That is a terrible, terrible idea, but that is the predominant voice that is influencing our government right now. And unless we have a counter to that, and we're just building, nice political offices and nice media platforms and maybe some good schools here and there, we're never going to really have an effect on that issue. We have to be a part of the mainstream discourse, and therefore it requires a different orientation than just having more Muslims in positions of influence.
Thank you so much. What I'm hearing you say is that core value system and having clarity in that core values, and then knowing where are those core values aligned in the Quran and leveraging that as a guide. Thank you so much. I definitely want to have you back out because we need to talk about your work in DC. We need to talk about these rising stars over the years, the CLDP program and everything else MPAC is doing to build, inshallah, a better future for everybody. Thank you so much for being on the show today, Salam. Always learn so much from you. And I might have to hop back on those Quran sessions every week just so I can always
anytime. You're welcome. Thursdays at noon Eastern time. You're always welcome to join us.
I'm going to do that. I'm going to reach out and be on those meetings, inshallah. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaikum salam.